What if I told you that the growth strategies that are praised in most business books and podcasts are actually setting you up for failure in what really matters and what you really want to accomplish in your business? The scale at all costs mentality has probably destroyed more businesses than it's actually built.
Yeah, the entrepreneurial world is obsessed with hyper growth stories, right? The unicorns, the rapid scaling, massive funding rounds. But behind the scenes, there's a graveyard of companies that grew too fast, too soon, without the foundations that would support that growth. It's just such a pressure almost, right? An external pressure of trying to scale, trying to grow. And then you do see those companies highlighted, the ones that are the quick, and they get put on a pedestal, right?
Yeah.
This is normal business, or this is what you need to strive for. But you don't see the wake of companies that try to grow too quickly, don't have the infrastructure, don't have the team, don't have the support, don't have the cash to get them to that point. And it can be a disaster.
Or they don't have the guy at the top, the founder, who's just willing to sacrifice everything else in his life to make this thing work. You hear so much of these success stories about people who built these massive businesses, and you're like, man, if I could just follow their principle, do that. But the thing is that you might be able to follow and adapt to those kind of guru principles. But the reality is that guy was on the road 28 days a month, living in hotels. All he did was grow his business. And so if that's what you want, then be that guy. But for most people, you start a business because you want to create a freedom lifestyle. And sometimes the way you get there is through scaling, but sometimes the way you get there is through knowing and setting clear targets of what do I actually want to accomplish? What's going to serve the life that I want to live? And scaling at a pace that actually makes sense for that kind of goal and lifestyle that you want to live. I would say we operate from a more contrarian approach, to use a popular buzzword right now, with the belief that smart growth actually beats fast growth. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I would. I think it's hard because you're trying to balance both. You're trying to grow fast, but then you're also, I was literally on a phone call an hour ago talking about this business, it's our construction company, that every time we try to create these processes, whether it's insurance, whether it's our invoicing, whether it's accounting, whether it's managing the cash flows, doing all these things, whenever we do that, it makes the growth slower.
Yeah.
Because we're trying to do work and it stops us from doing work, or hinders us from doing work in the short term, because we've got to stop and do all this like stuff we don't want to do.
Right.
But that's the idea of growing smart, though. Because I think in a year, those things that we're doing now that we don't like doing, like we're building out this whole template thing for ordering, and there's just so many nuances to it, and it's taken like a month.
Yeah.
And we've not really done any work. We've done some, but our actual production has gone down in like Q1. We were just looking at it, like we didn't do a lot of actual work.
Yeah.
But we did a lot of like internal work though.
Yeah.
But I wanted to do work out there, like measurable work too, right?
Sure.
But it's hard to do both. And so, I would agree with that statement, but I would just say it's really hard. I certainly don't do a good job at it because I want to do more production, right?
Yeah.
Numbers that are seen, right?
Yeah.
Versus the inner work. But I think that is really a key to, it's like when you're building skyscrapers and stuff, I think they said like how deep some of those things go.
Yeah.
Like stories and stories deep.
Yeah.
Like hundreds of feet even.
Yeah.
Before they ever go up.
It's the kind of the age-old, even biblical principle of the house that's built on a firm foundation will stand. The house that's just thrown together on a shifting foundation. And the foundation is the part that you don't see. It's the part that doesn't seem like it yields results, but it's what holds up whatever you build on top of it. And if your goal is to build something big, then putting in a lot of effort into shoring up that foundation is absolutely critical.
I think it's the difference between, you see a lot of people that are always on to the next venture, and they maybe make a quick buck, but probably at the end of the day, they made nothing. Like they count for their time and stuff. And then they're on to the next new thing. And it's shallow stuff.
Yeah.
They're not committing to a long like runway of, I think the stuff we're working on, we're already like, that's just unfortunately going to take probably 10 years.
Yeah.
Of just at least 5 to really, I wish it was sooner. I wish we could, no amount of money will make it sooner. Hiring all the right people isn't going to make it sooner. Like it just takes time. Like it's just a timeline of
Yeah.
doing the work too. Even if you have all the right pieces, like there's nothing that can shortcut that.
Yeah. And it's important to not underestimate the amount of time that it's going to take to build something that's meaningful, something that's sustainable, and something that actually serves the life that you want to live. And to do that while avoiding burnout in the process that's a delicate balance, right? Because you can go really hard in short stints. And I actually believe in that philosophy, but you got to have, I read a book. I was in kind of a mentorship coaching group years ago, and I'm trying to remember the name of the book, but it was about how putting stress and then having a commensurate amount of recovery actually is how you improve performance in your business, with your physical body, with all of that. And like when I train with my trainer, Glenn, right? He has me do these 4x4s, and it's for cardiovascular training, where it's like you're running super hard for 4 minutes, literally at an 8-9 RPE. You're going almost to your limit for 4 minutes. And then literally for 4 minutes after that, you're laying on the floor, like
Crying.
maybe crying, but being as like relaxed and calm and using as little energy as possible. And then you jump up, you do that back and forth 4 times for a little over half an hour.
Yeah. It
Right?
shocks you and builds that.
And that's how you build and get and grow and get stronger. And so I'm a big proponent of big pushes and then big reprieves. That's why even the big family vacation that I take every year with my family, like we do 3 weeks, which for most entrepreneurs or business owners, it'd be like, that seems impossible. But it's like, for me, it's necessary to have reprieve where I can have enough time to get my head clear, to actually recharge and get energy, because I'm running a marathon of sprints is the philosophy. And so it's go hard, but then have a commensurate amount of recovery so that you don't experience that burn and you actually get stronger and better, and your business gets stronger and better as you go.
Yeah. And I think the idea of the hyperscaling, or whatever you want to, we're referring to it as, is you're not ever recovering. And but then the performance, I totally have experienced that, where you do, whether it's late nights or too many things. And then you have to, once you commit to that stuff too, it's like really hard to have the reprieve, because there's so much stuff that needs to get done and everything. But then the overall performance goes down to where you just have like off days. Yeah. Because like a whole afternoon is just off mentally.
And you don't get anything done.
Exactly. And
so you might as well be like resting and like in those moments. I've experienced that 100%.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just hard, right? I don't know what, it's not hard. I think it's the same idea of taking off, like you said, times for mental health, times for rest, whether it's a Sabbath, whether it's time shutting the work down at night. It's not, I say this way, it's simple but hard. Yeah. It's not a complicated concept. Just stop working when the day's over. Yeah. Anybody can understand that. But then once you're in the business, it's not as easy to actually do that. Yeah. So
in our education business where we coach fund managers, I'm thinking of one particular client that I have done quite a few coaching calls with. And he really wants to grow and scale his fund. And he is struggling with the fact that he's not seeing the immediate results that he sees other people doing it. And I realized that when I had this conversation with him, it was a couple of weeks ago, where I talked to him about how the problem that most entrepreneurs, fund managers, whatever industry you're in, the problem that we face is a patience problem. Understanding that law of averages works in everyone's favor. It's no respecter of persons, right? If you put in the work for a long enough period of time, you will see results. It's the same with training your body, whatever it is. But if you expect that you're going to see that kind of initial burst out of the gate that someone else saw, and you don't see that, you can think, maybe this is not the right place. Maybe this is not the right business for me to be in. Maybe it's not the right thing for me to be focused. But the reality is that it's the same for everybody, right? When we've got one guy that we coach that he started and in his first 4 months raised like $4 million into his fund. And that's like super successful for somebody just getting started.
Right. Yeah.
And then but now that guy's at the point where he's struggling to get continued growth. And then you got the other guy that it's taken him a while to not even get his first million, but he will hit that spike up eventually.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's just not when the spike happens, when the growth happens, not what's important. It's understanding and signing up that when you're building a business of any kind, you have to have patience, or else you will make dumb decisions to try to force something to happen rather than letting things take their natural course, controlling the things that you can control, building the things that you can build. Get it out there, get it into the market, get your messaging out there, get all that, and continue to refine and just be consistent. I think that's the number one thing that entrepreneurs who end up failing and just going out and just getting a job or doing whatever, it's the number one contributor, I think, is it's just a patience problem. It's not understanding the value of consistency over long periods of time to produce the result that you want. And most of the folks listening to this show are folks who've already maybe had quite a bit of success in their business, and they would resonate with that. But the principle remains the same. If you're trying to get to somewhere else from where you are now, regardless of how successful your business is now, maybe you're doing 10 million in revenue annually, or you're doing 100 million in revenue annually. For entrepreneurs, the goalpost is always moving. We want to always get to the next level. The way that you do that, though, is not by trying to get there fast. It's by trying to get there smart. And the smart way is just be consistent on the things that work and figure out ways to dial in on the things that are working the best and increase your focus on those things, on the things that are working. How can you then scale the things that are working versus just trying to scale everything at the same time?
Yeah. And I think I'm having a thought as you're saying all that is a lot of times people that start businesses are more entrepreneurial, the founders of those businesses. They're maybe not as good at management or operations. They want to just get something exciting going. Yeah. And then there's that burst of that flame that then gets extinguished because they don't have a team or it fizzles out. And so I think that's another statistically, these businesses that, over 18 months fizzle out. The Bureau of Labor Statistics Business Dynamics reports shows the average time to profitability for sustainable businesses 18 to 24 months. Only 4% of businesses ever reach $1 million in revenue. I think a lot of that is just because of that excitement on the front end. And then I was just having a conversation with somebody earlier this week about in real estate is the business that I'm in, buying real estate. It can be a process getting up to the closing, but that's the entrepreneurial piece, right? It's excitement. It's the sales side. It's trying to get the thing under contract, getting it closed and everything. But then once it's closed, I had a conversation with our asset manager. I'm like, all right, now the work begins. Yeah. Because now we have 5 years of executing this business plan. And on the acquisition side, it's sweet. I'm on to the next deal. Yeah. But I think that's where same principle in business, it can be easy to get excited and then you just see it over and over. Yeah. I think a team is really helpful in that because there's people that don't get excited about doing something new. They actually like the management part. Yeah. They're not excited about buying something new or getting a new thing going. They're more excited about building the processes and building that foundation, like you were mentioning earlier, for that sustainability. So I think you need to have those types of people in the organization. You need both. Yeah. And have a clear vision and expectation of what is real. Because there is no business venture that you can get in where you can only just always do the exciting, fun stuff. Like there is an element of business that is just work and it's just stuff that you don't want to do. And you can hire people and you can do that, but you still have to manage those people. You still have to make sure those things get done the right way and that you're setting the right expectations of outcome, inviting those people obviously to bring their genius to the table and achieve those outcomes and not micromanaging. But ultimately, like as the business owner, the buck stops with you. If this thing doesn't happen, that's on you. If this thing doesn't get done, that's on you. And so knowing that a lot of business is just work and repeated tasks and doing stuff that is not all that exciting, but it's how well you execute on those things that determines how smart you're going to be able to scale and grow your company. So I think another real big challenge that a lot of business owners face either earlier on in their journey or at strategic junctures when they're trying to push for growth and scale is under prioritizing cash flow in their business. It's like
we have this tendency to just want to reinvest as much as we possibly can and just pour as much into growth as we can and just send our payday further down the line to say, if I do this now, I'll make more money 3 years from now or whatever. And in the meantime, that's an old model, right? It's like raise up a bunch of capital from investors or whatever, do a funding round, and then burn through that cash and figure out profitability later. Just build. And I think that's essential a lot of times in a startup phase. But what we're talking about is how do you take a business that's already somewhat sustainable, scale it to a point where you can actually own an exit. It's actually significant revenue generating, profit generating business. And that does require some strategic reinvestment into it and some growth. But it's a thin line because there's a cash flow reality that has been responsible for tanking. Like 96% of businesses that fail because of cash flow issues. It's not that they don't have enough equity in their business. They don't have enough value that they've created. It's that they can't keep the lights on. They can't keep the employees paid. They can't keep the things running because they just don't have enough cash flow.
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's just, it's got to be part of your model, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cash flow is, I think we've talked about this on other podcasts. I have 2025 cash flow models on everything where basically what's your break even cash flow? Like how much does it cost to keep the lights on? Multiply that across your whole year. And you need to have, what's the minimum that you need to have coming in? When you're a solopreneur, you don't need to do that. Because the worst case is you just don't have money for your food or shelter or whatever.
Yeah, that's the worst case. You just starve to death. That's all.
You can usually figure it out when it's a single person.
Exactly.
Once you have a family, that adds another dynamic.
Yeah.
When you're a business, somebody who starts a business. And I think statistically, like a lot of people do start businesses. Everyone's, I'm like at 22, I'm so behind and everything. It's most successful business owners, like businesses that are brands that started when they were like 45.
Yeah.
So a lot of those people have families and everything. So to your point, it's more important on managing cash flow there. But then as you start to have overhead, when you're a solopreneur, you just scrounge by.
Yeah.
But then when you have responsibilities like other people that are under your care and employees that need to be, they're not on the same, they're not there. They need to get their paychecks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Versus, hey, later it'll work out or whatever. They're not in the business in that way.
That reminds me though of a point that Robert Kiyosaki makes in Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And it's that one of his biggest anchoring business principles is always pay yourself first.
I haven't followed that one.
Yeah. No, I don't think I have either. But
he's talking about investing, right?
He's talking about building a business. Always pay yourself first. The reason is that one, you don't want to be a person in your business that is under financial constraint and you're stressed about, you've got that additional stress in addition to the stress of building your business. But then also as an entrepreneur and a problem solver, if you pay yourself first, then you have the bandwidth and capacity to figure out the other problems versus just paying yourself last, which is what most business owners do. They pay themselves last. And it's like you're putting yourself, the one who's solely responsible, at the bottom of the value chart. You're saying that essentially because getting paid for something is a value transaction, right? An exchange of value. Who's going to bring more value to your company than you? So that to me, I see the value of what he's saying. Now, it's not always when we're making real life decisions and we've got, it's either I can't afford to pay this guy this month or I can't afford to pay myself. Of course, I'm going to be the one who takes the hit. I'm not going to let that guy go because I need him.
Yeah.
But I think having that as a value and something that is part of a smart scaling strategy, right? Making sure that your bases are covered.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not harvesting all the profit, but it's making sure that you have a steady flow of income that's going into your family and your home and the things that are important to you.
Yeah, and setting yourself just a line item. Hey, I'm paying myself $5,000 a month or $50,000 or whatever your
whatever
pay
your number is, whatever you need
to have that built in as part of your cash flow projections.
Yeah,
so that any extra is just staying in the company.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I think another challenge is the focus trap. And we'll wrap up the show with this, is the I remember there was a presentation YouTube video that Alex Hormozi did where he talked about the typical cycle of the entrepreneur opportunist. And you touched on this earlier, and I wanted to talk around it for just a moment. It's this chart of everyone starts in a venture with uninformed optimism. They don't know at all what it's going to take to be successful. They have no clue.
They think it's
Everything.
easier.
It's going to be easier. It's going to be this. It's uninformed optimism, and that uninformed optimism grows to a point of becoming informed pessimism. It drops from there into like despair and questioning life. And it's the people who typically it's in that moment where they try to navigate from that point in the growth curve back over here to uninformed optimism. In other words, they opportunity jump.
They go to a new thing.
When they realize that it's going to be too hard.
But everything's that way, though.
Then they jump over here to uninformed optimism again.
On a new
and
thing.
They start this on a new thing. But the people that can make it through that moment of despair, dejection, I'm informed pessimism. Now I realize just how hard it's going to be. Just on the other side of that is informed optimism. You know how hard it's going to be, but you're suddenly able to see the path forward and things get a lot more clear. Yeah. And so understanding, like, if you're building and growing your business and you're at that point where you're realizing how freaking hard it is to grow and build a business to the point where it actually has sustainable value and you can own your exit through your efforts in that business, you got to find a way to be able to push through that. And the biggest thing that you need in that is focus. Yeah. Put the blinders on. Don't let other opportunities that you see, because you see this guy over here and he's having success doing this thing and he's traveling the world and doing all this kind of stuff. I need to get in his vehicle. Yeah. But the problem is you don't know how hard that guy freaking worked to get there and how many times he hit despair and pessimism and all those kind of things.
Got lucky.
He pushed through it.
Yeah. So many different things could have been involved in that.
Yeah. And sometimes you do discover that you're in the wrong vehicle, and that's okay.
And I think that the optimism that you mentioned, I think is good and exploratory. I think it's good to have that. Could this work? Yeah. And then hitting that wall of questioning life or whatever. Yeah. Before you get to that, you could just shut it down. Because I think you could. I think because we've talked about this before, 80% of businesses fail in the first 2 years, like 95 in the first 5. But a lot of them fail. I don't know what true business failure is in that, because I think a lot of it is like the business doesn't exist anymore, so it gets thrown in the failure bucket. But I think some of it is like, I just don't want to do that business anymore. Yeah. And I've had a few of those where were they business failures? I guess, because they're not going anymore. Yeah. But they were more intentional decisions to like, I thought this was going to be good or viable or, and then you get into it and you just realize, nah.
And that's probably the difference between an opportunist, which is not what you want to be, and just being a serial entrepreneur that is willing to throw spaghetti against the wall and see if it sticks and is willing to.
And if it does, then you're like, all right, now we got to have to work for the next 5 years. Yeah. Building that foundation. If it's truly something that makes sense, but sometimes you just don't know if it even makes sense at first. That's been my experience on stuff, because like you said, you don't know anything. Maybe it's a new industry, maybe it's something that you just have to see, and you got to have to spend time and money to see. Absolutely. And hopefully not too much, but a little bit, to get into that. And I think that's just a normal process. But if you're always doing that, because every time you do that, you talked about that cycle, right? That takes a lot of energy. Oh, yeah. You just set yourself back like 6 months by doing that. Yeah. And you're walking away with, if you don't learn from that experience, then you're starting it over. And we know people that are like 50 years old that have just been on that loop. Yeah. And it's always some new thing, some financial thing, some startup, some great opportunity, some franchise, but it's always something new. Yeah. And it's always super exciting, like just like the last one. Yeah. But you just don't get anywhere. Yeah. And so
this is going to be really funny. And we'll wrap up with this. Not necessarily really funny, but odd that I would bring this. My 7-year-old, I got a Nintendo Switch for Christmas this past year. I got that for her and put all the old Super Nintendo, Super NES games on it, and she's all about some Donkey Kong Country.
It's just so cutting edge.
And I loved that game when I was a kid, probably her age. Like I would rock out on some DK country. But it's funny, the goal of every like level or every world or whatever you want to call it is to get to Candy's safe point. Because if you get to Candy's safe point, then when you die, you get to start back over right where you left off. But if you don't get there, then you got to beat all of these levels again. And she kept making the mistake of getting all the way to the boss. She couldn't beat the boss, but she didn't go to Candy's safe point. So she had to restart again. She was getting so frustrated. She's like, I already beat these levels. And she kept dying at the boss. And I told her, I was like, you got to save your progress. You got to go to Candy's save point and jump in the little starry box is what you need to do. And I think that advice that I gave my daughter on how to play Donkey Kong Country is exactly the advice that entrepreneurs should take. It is, you're gonna get to the same boss over and over. The same challenge is gonna get, no matter what vehicle, no matter what business venture, whatever. The point is, make sure you save your progress up to that point, because you're gonna get beat. You're gonna get beat some as you're trying to grow and scale. But save your progress. Remember what got you to that point in the first place. Don't keep making the same mistakes over and over and over. Be more smart about your
exploration.
Yeah, and that's what it means to scale smart. Not don't take risks and don't push for more. It's just make sure that you remember what got you to the point. Double down on that stuff. Jump in the little starry box. Go to Candy's safe point. Don't let the boss keep beating you, and then you have to restart every time. And I think that's what Alex Hormozi was highlighting on that whole entrepreneurial growth chart is, if you're going to go back, uninformed optimism, at least remember that you're probably going to get to this point even on this venture. You're probably going to get to that point of despair and questioning the meaning of life again.
Yeah.
And you just got to get stronger and better, and you got to beat that boss so that you can get on the other side of it. So that's
awesome.
Come on.
Get some Donkey Kong.
All right. Thanks, guys, for listening to Own the Exit.
Thanks, guys.